Okay, cool. So we are talking about how to get your team to think like you, which is, in my opinion, you could tell me, is like one of the most valuable things you can possibly have in your business, especially as you're growing and scaling. It is basically a lifesaver in terms of like saving your time, saving your energy, saving your decision fatigue, all of those things. But I also feel like it's one of the things that gets talked about the least and that business owners focus on the least, which I think is interesting too. So anyway, we're going to talk about all that today. That's basically how we run a Lit Up Life. Like our biggest priority is for Megan to be able to think how I think so that we can move the needle forward, so she can help me so much more, so we can be so much more effective. So we're kind of just try to explain all of that today and what that looks like. So Megan, maybe share just a little bit from your perspective on like why that's such a thing. Obviously, I think it's kind of clear why it would be a thing for me, but why is it also helpful for a team?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's one of those things where, especially when you're doing work for somebody else, the more that you can understand the way that they think about things just helps make whatever you're doing that much easier because basically, like, I mean, you are doing work for somebody else. And so it kind of, you want it to be like their preferences, the way that they would do it, the
Yeah.
way that they would say something, like whatever, like you're kind of trying to adopt their approach to something,
Yeah.
right? And so on one hand, like, yes, you can kind of communicate a lot of that in like in specific tasks and stuff, but over time, the way that that just becomes easier is through everything that we're going to talk about today, which is knowing how you think and not just like what is it that you want me to do, right? Like I think that there's just such a big difference behind that, and then it just limits, like, I feel more confident in my job, and team, like the rest of the team also feels more confident in what they're doing. You also feel like you're able to obviously like not have as many like small decisions on every
Totally.
thing, and so I feel like it just kind of creates a little bit more of this feeling of like everyone can kind of knows what they're doing and why they're doing it, and kind of can just keep things rolling like more smoothly.
Yes. Love it. Hey, Jen. Jen says yes. Okay. So, guys, if you're here, say hi. And also, if you have questions, let us know. Megan is an amazing resource and only pops in here once a month. So, if you have team related, process related questions, she's your girl. So, let us know. But yes, I so agree with everything that you said. And I think that it's really helpful for people to hear both sides, because I think that sometimes, like, we forget how valuable that is to our team members too. Like we forget that it makes them feel so much more confident in their job, makes them feel so much more ease, which I think is true. Like I can remember like in past jobs where I had bosses who I just knew what they were going to say and how they were thinking about it. And I was able to like excel in those positions where I had them that like we never form that rapport. So I never had that. And it was just so much harder day to day to like do the job, make the decision, that kind of stuff. So I think so similar here in a sense. And makes less decisions for you because you're able to filter through like, how would Lacey think about this? Cool, it's that, versus like, should we do this? Does she want that? I have no idea. Right. And it got so complicated.
And I think it also like slows things down quite a bit too, because
Yes.
it's like, if I need to ask you like for every single small thing, it's like I have to ask, and then I have to wait for your reply, and then maybe I have a follow-up question. And then so like I feel like, super simple tasks can sometimes take like a full day to actually get done. And then if anything else was waiting on that task or something, like I
Or
just
if
think
you're in
that
different
there's
time zones.
yes, totally, totally. Yeah,
I
so I
have
think
some
that the
clients that
more
deal
that
with
you can limit that, the better.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I have some clients that deal with that too, with the time zone thing. And that's so relevant to what you're saying, or the day to accomplish a task versus the speed and kind of knowing what, you'll say. And I think that that's almost some of the time what makes people think like, I would just rather do it myself. It'll get done faster if I do it myself. And it's like, that's true until I start teaching my team like what answer I would probably have, how I would think about it. And, the truth is Megan and I have been working together for like 5 years. So some of that has been built over time, but honestly, we've had this down for a really long time. Like we've been really intentional about this from like pretty much, square one in terms of that. And so yes, part of our like rapport and her ability to read my mind basically is length of time. But honestly, it really has been like that for a while. I think it's much more related to how we operate than it is to just the time sequence, basically, right?
I totally agree. I feel like it has gotten, like with time, obviously that has helped.
Yep.
But I think like from the beginning, we just we always prioritized this.
Yeah.
And so I think that it just made it that time. Like we didn't need 5 years in order to, like, for me to understand how you think. We started kind of with that process in from the beginning. And so 5 years later, it's just that much better, right?
Yep, totally. Completely agree. Hi, Shari. Okay, so team questions, let us know if you're just jumping on, but we'll kind of start going through them. So the first one that I think is like the most important, I feel like there's maybe like 5 or so that like really matter in terms of how we structure it, but it seems obvious, but the first one is over communicate. Like, I think that sometimes, especially when we're busy and we're moving really fast through the day, we do not take the time to over communicate with our team. We're trying to say like the bare minimum and like get it done kind of thing. And I really try to like over communicate with Megan. Like, if that means it takes me longer to write it out, or if I need to send her a voice note, or if I, whatever, like my goal is always for her to almost be like, I got it, plenty of information, babe, kind of thing. Versus what Megan said earlier, which is for me to be like in a hurry and trying to like just get it to her really fast, and then her to have to come back and be like, but wait, there's more questions, because that actually slows it way down. So that's like a filter I try to run through in terms of this, is like, did I over communicate? Like we were literally just dealing with this on something, I think this morning kind of thing. And I remember, like I even said to you, I feel like I haven't fully communicated everything I need to here. So pause on this task until I can come back and kind of like over communicate everything with you, and then we'll pick it up. And so we really make that a priority of like, how can I put everything that you need to know and some in this, because that's what helps her actually really effectively do her job. Where I feel like sometimes we're almost like positioning that the wrong way. Like, I shouldn't have to tell them everything. I shouldn't have to over communicate. I shouldn't have to take that time. But I promise you that 3 extra minutes it takes me or whatever to add context saves us 3 hours of like back and forth time, right?
100%. And I think sometimes like just the added context, it helps with, from my perspective, that's what helps with not just that specific task, but in learning kind of the big picture of how you think about things in general, right? Where like how you think about this specific task might be specific to this task, but it will, like with time, I will see how that same thing applies to so many other areas. And so the more that you can provide like that full picture for your team, the more that they'll see those patterns and start to pick up on those things. And really like it's learning kind of the why and the reasoning behind everything, and the, full picture, rather than just like a specific detail type of like response about things.
Yep, totally. I have so much to say on that, but let's answer Shari's question first, which is, do you have like tools, questions, or ways you go about getting some of this qualitative info from a new client when you start working together? So say it's not me, say it's a new client and you want to start thinking how they think. Like, is there a certain way you kind of approach that initially?
That's a really good question. It's been so long since I've had a new client. So I would say that, I think we're going to talk about this in a second, but like one of the things that's really important for me is to have regular communication with all my clients. So I always have a minimum of 1 meeting per month, and like the more that we are working together, the more frequent that is. And so that is kind of like the starting point for me, is just making sure that we have that baseline.
Yeah.
And I try to, like, in those calls especially, but just like in general, in all of my questions, I ask a ton of questions. I ask a ton of things, and like ask for some of that like extra context on things. And I think that most of it comes out like in calls, I think
Yeah, that's
sometimes.
good too to say, like, where it's like, that's almost like the foundation point for where that stuff
Right.
is going to flow. Yeah.
Yeah, because then like, and then I can even say like, okay, so just want to make sure I see the big picture. Tell me a little bit more about your thought process about around that. And I think sometimes like it just ends up happening naturally because we have so much communication, because I have
Yeah.
said, tell me more or something. So I think that just like asking for more context can really help with that.
I think transparency too. Like, I feel like one thing that you and I do really well is we're always like transparent about like what we're trying to do with something. So like we're saying to each other, I want you to think how I think in this way, or you're coming to me and saying like, I want to understand how you're thinking about this so I can serve you better. So I feel like even just that context, like that we kind of miss sometimes with saying that to a potential client. Like, are we saying, hey, it's so great to have you as a new client. One of my biggest priorities is to think how you think. So I'll probably ask you, da, da, da. So I think that's really helpful too.
Totally.
Because I know for me as someone that like has team, if they say that to me, I'm on that. Like, what do you need from me? Of course. How do I show up for that? But like in the absence of that, if I feel like I'm just answering a shit ton of questions or something, I'm more likely to be like, what's the thing here? Versus like, oh, it totally makes sense why I'm answering all these questions. That's such a good goal for us to have to get to the place where you think how I think. So I think that's really helpful too. Shari also wants to know, do you apply this approach when working with like less strategic team members too, who are just more task focused, or is this more just like, COO OBM kind of level?
I mean, I think everyone, I would say, at least like specific to kind of like their like area.
Yes.
So like I would say, anytime that like our VA who does a lot of like the social media stuff and everything, like I would say that like we have the same approach. It's just kind of more specific to her types of tasks. And then our graphic designer would obviously receive totally different like information, but the same types of things apply, just kind of more segmented. Whereas I think like my role, it's kind of like everything. And then and then everyone else has kind of like their little like, area of expertise or something like that, where they're still learning like how you think within that arena.
Yeah, it's not just like we have someone that like does the posting of social media. Like they very much get, here's why we use social media. Here's how we think about it as a relationship builder. Here's how blah, 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 right? Amy says, not sure if you acknowledged it yet, but love that y'all are dressed alike for this combo. So we didn't acknowledge it on here, but when we both got on, Megan was like, I fucking knew you were going to wear black and that I should have worn cream. But I mean, it's really not like a big jump to guess that I'm going to wear black. Like, yeah. But also Megan has hoops in, which is a big deal.
That's true. I never wear jewelry. I think this is like the first time in probably a year.
This is a big deal. We could have matched more. I really should have gone hoops. It would have really just...
I should have texted, yeah.
It just made this whole thing so much better. Okay, cool. So yes to that.
Can I just say, isn't it a little bit funny where like we're on a conversation around like how to get your team to think like you, and we literally show up like
we're like, get them to dress like you too. If they're deciding what color, make sure they're gonna pick your fave. Like, that's so funny, actually. We should have just said that we did it on purpose. This is just how in tune we are with each other. Okay, so we kind of already went over this second point a little bit, but just to reiterate, taking the time for actual calls, so important. When I talk to my clients, sometimes when they're having a problem with the team member, the first question I ask is, are you getting on regular calls with them? And I would say that about 50% of the time, that's the initial issue. Like they're like, no, we haven't talked. on the phone call in like 2 months. And I'm like, cool. So that's probably part of it. Basically how Megan was saying before, that's where so many like contexts and questions can come out. It's just like, think about the difference between coaching someone on a call versus trying to coach someone just in writing. There is a place where Basecamp and writing back and forth is helpful, but without the context of calls, that would be so different and missing so much. And so the same is true when you're trying to help your team think how you think. Like basically Megan and I use calls for that purpose, and we use written communication for like getting, a question answered or something that we need to like make happen that day to like move the needle. But the actual conversation of like, here's how I'm thinking about this predominantly happens on phone calls, right?
Totally. And I think that that's just like, it's so helpful because I think that when in written communication, we kind of naturally just answer a question, like answer a specific question versus like when we are verbally communicating, we tend to kind of explain, well, this is like blah, 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 blah. So it's almost like a natural way where you're just more likely to give more context just because you're talking out loud rather than writing. And so I think that is just super helpful. And I think, it just provides more opportunity to kind of ask more questions, like your team or you, right? Like both, like just back and forth that goes pretty quick, I think.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Shari noticed your earrings too. And she really likes
thank you.
Amy loves it. Michelle says, I love it when in office, like everyone in an office starts dressing alike. It's so true. I've totally had that. Rumor is that hoops during live streams thing is just the way that I taunt Tristan about no longer having his ears pierced. Yes, I specifically said Megan wear hoops or Megan is just taunting you. It could be that
Apparently,
too.
yes.
It could be that. Yeah, that's so funny.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Totally a thing. So, okay, next thing that I want to say, because it sort of like goes off of what we were just saying too, but this is more like a personal commitment that sort of goes to the other thing, is when I answer a question, I always endeavor to give context. So like Megan was saying, in written communication, it is usually quicker to just answer yes, no, do that, don't do that, whatever. But if Megan and I are 2 weeks out from a call together or whatever, that doesn't help. So if you can make sure, and like, this is something I'd really check in on, if you're building a team, whether you have like one person or multiple people, when you're answering team questions, are you always giving context? And again, extra step for sure, but like the most worthwhile. So yeah, we're good. My thing just said connection unstable.
Okay.
The most worthwhile step you can take, because if every time you answer a question, you provide the context around the reason I'm answering like this is because, the reason I'm thinking about it like this is because, the reason I'm saying yes is because, your team picks up on that so fast, right? If you just say yes, you might say yes 15 times before they can even guess that you're probably going to say yes again. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, sometimes like knowing the why the answer is yes to this situation, but like in a kind of similar but different situation, the answer would be no. Like knowing the why behind it makes it so that your team can kind of start to differentiate between those small differences, right? Like sometimes it's not just a blanket, like I always say yes to this. Yes, 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 yes. Right. Like sometimes it is like, well, yes to this, but no to that, and kind of like sort of like this. And so the more that you can provide that context and that reason why, that just kind of like helps them understand and kind of almost like create like rules in their head of like, okay, if this, then that, like that kind of thing. Yep. So yeah, I think that just that added reasoning, and it doesn't have to be like 5 paragraphs, right? Like it doesn't have to be like, well, first I was thinking about it this way, and then I decided to change my mind here. Like you can make it pretty short and sweet, or like, I know a lot of people who they have some type of like longer explanation. Like you can always like ask your team to hop on an extra call, send them a voice memo, like something like that, where you can almost like add on additional like communication if that is needed, or maybe like more frequent calls or something like that. So
And also remember to communicate that to them. Like, I think, again, like missing piece sometimes is like, make sure you say to them, like, hey, when I answer your questions, I'm going to be providing a lot of context because our goal here really is for you to think how I think. So make sure to pay attention to the context because that's really important. Right. Again, like, I think it's like, is that stated versus are they like, why is she giving me all this context? Make sure they know that's the reason. Right. Because then it becomes helpful and they can actually do something with it versus being like, wait, what? Okay. So, you know what I mean? But like, if they're like, oh yeah, that actually makes sense. It would be helpful for me to be able to make this decision again in the future. It gets so much easier. But also something that I see as like with my clients too, like they're making so many decisions with me, right? So they've already talked through a whole thing. They already know it. They already talked through it. They already have all the context in their mind. So they're just going to team and saying yes. Versus like, yeah, you might talk through it with your coach, but like they're not in our conversation. So make sure to give it to them too, right? Because sometimes for you, it almost feels like, oh, I just talked through it with my coach. It makes sense. It's solidified. It's done. But again, team still wasn't part of that. So making sure to wrap that around.
And I think that that kind of goes back into like the over communication piece too, because I think that like, even if you feel like, oh, I've already told them this or explained this or something, sometimes I think it's totally fine to like repeat that, especially at the beginning too, or if it's
Totally.
like a bigger concept or anything like that. I just feel like sometimes that reiteration of why you're thinking about something
Yep.
is super helpful because it just starts to really solidify that in their mind.
Yeah, I still do that to you all the time on
Yeah.
stuff that you know what I mean? It's just better to like, it's sort of like in your content, like when every person that starts writing content has that thing at first where they're like, I feel like I'm saying the same thing until you realize like, oh wait, that's the point. The same should be true with team where it feels like, oh, Megan, you probably already know this, but again, the reason I'm saying yes here is because blank. Like that's still helpful and important, and it still keeps that rolling in such a different way. We'll give you some examples of stuff like this too in a few just so that it makes more sense. But something I just want to say really quick too is like one of the reasons that I am such a believer in this is because I also see that it's what a difference that gets made even with my one-on-one clients. So like when we're talking about stuff, like I'm not just saying to them, yes, go run ads on this. Yes, hire that person. Yes, do that, whatever. I'm like, cool, here's how I'm thinking about it. Here's why I think we should do this, right? So like I feel like I'm literally like in that place with my clients too, where I'm trying to transmit to them, like, here's how you can think about business. Here's the way to think about this. So then they get better and better at thinking about it like that. Like some of my clients that have worked with me for a long time are like, I already know what you're going to say about this, but blank, or I already know how you're thinking about this, but blank, right? That's so valuable to them because they get to start taking that away and finding it easier and easier and easier to make decisions. So you can see how that's true with team. You can see how that's true with clients. And that's like so what's missing in our space. Everything is about like, do this, do that, take this step, do this strategy. Missing so much of the context of like, why would that make sense? How are we thinking about it? How are we understanding business in that way, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I think that's just really important to say because it's like, whether you're listening to this and you have a team or not, the idea of like helping people think how you think, wildly important. And I don't mean that in the robotic way of like, they have to have your same personality or whatever, but I mean like, if they're coming to you for business advice or whatever, and you can help them think about how you think about business, trust me, that's a game changer. If they're coming to you for health advice, et cetera, you know what I mean?
I think it's important too because it's like one of those things where it's not specific to a specific situation, right? If you're only saying
Exactly.
do this, do this, do this, then they're basically just learning how to do that specific
Yep,
thing. And
totally.
when you teach them how to actually think about it and kind of the reasoning behind it, then I think that's when we can kind of apply that same principle, that same concept, that same idea, and that same approach to several different things in different areas.
Yep, 100%. So good. Okay. Next thing I would say is give permission to make that decision. So this is another one that I see with some of my clients where they get stuck, where they're like, oh, I wish my team was like making decisions for me like Megan makes for you or whatever. And I'm like, well, have you told them they can? Like, have you given them the permission to run with that? And they're like, no. Right. And it's like, cool. Like it is a very intentional thing for me to say, like, Megan, have at it. Like, I totally trust you, make this decision for me, kind of thing. It's not something that she's just going to naturally start doing. That has to come from me being the leader of my business, saying like, hey, I feel cool if you own decisions on X, Y, and Z. Do you feel good about that? Right. So like that, again, like that same thing of like context is everything, asking for specifically what you want out of that. Megan's not just going to like go rogue and start making all these decisions in my business unless I've given her the green light to do that. So if you're kind of thinking like, you know, why is my team member not stepping up? Why are they not doing some of this? I'm communicating a lot. What's happening? Have you communicated that they should be making those decisions, right?
Totally. Yeah.
There was something else I was going to say around that. Shoot. What was I going to have to say? Yeah, I don't know. It's gone. But basically, like, ask yourself that question. And if you're a person on the team, ask your leader that question potentially too. Hey, I feel like I could really be making a lot of these decisions for you. Does that actually feel good? Like it, you know, obviously it can go both ways. It certainly, in my opinion, should start with the CEO, but like it can really go both ways. Like, grant the green light, you know, that still has to come from you. Do you feel like anything on that from a team perspective, or like what is helpful around that?
Yeah. I mean, like, I think that I personally, like, am not like, I don't ever, I'm not the type of person that like asks for permission or asks for forgiveness, not permission. Like, I'm very much more like, I ask for permission to take these steps first.
Totally.
And like, sometimes I know kind of like where those boundaries are and stuff like that. And I can kind of like feel that out. But I think that it's one of those things where, it is very particular to every client. Some of my clients are like, no, I want you to just like roll with things, just make decisions. And other clients are very much like, I would like to be checked in with more frequently and at more areas and stuff like that. So I think that it's really important for your team members who are working with multiple clients to be able to differentiate between like, this client likes these like me to just like handle these decisions versus this client is like, you know, doesn't like wants me to check in all the time or something like that. So I think the more that you can communicate, this is what I would love for this to happen or something, that just helps to just like clarify that for them. Because I think that often it's like, you don't want to just like do it and then, because then you just like feel bad, especially if it was the wrong decision or something and you didn't ask permission or verification or something like that. So I think just having that's like specific conversation sometimes can be super helpful.
I love what you said about how everyone is different too, because I think that's so true. And that's why you have to be the one leading that and saying what you want. Something Megan and I talk about all the time is, does your team know how to make you happy? Megan knows I'm happiest when she just decides, because I trust her and it's fine. And like, we're all good. There are no emergencies here. Decide and I support you. But someone else might be totally, totally different. And so again, our job as leader is to communicate that. Say like, you would be making me most happy if X, you made all of these decisions, or you made some of these decisions, or whatever that is, right? Katrina says, Megan, I know you have a team behind you at Whitespace. How do you transmit this kind of thinking to them from your clients, or do you?
I mean, a lot of it is like, I will like, sometimes I'll just say like, kind of generally speaking, like, hey, we always want to do X, Y, and Z for our clients. Like, so some of it is actually kind of like coming from me and my approach and the way that I think, where I try to transmit that to them as well. But then also like, if it's like something for a specific client, I will say like, Lacey really values X, Y, and Z. So whenever we're working in her stuff, this is how we want to approach it. These are the way we want to, handle those situations, that kind of thing. So I try to kind of do both. Like I try to have it be like sometimes like client specific, handing that down, but then sometimes I also try to just like have almost like my thought processes and how I approach things, that's kind of transferred through as well.
I think I've talked about this before quite a bit, but when I worked in the nonprofit space, I got like 5 or 6 promotions really fast over like the course of a year, and kind of went from, like bottom of the totem pole to top of the totem pole pretty quickly. And I remember when I like got into like, director level stuff, being like, wait, this is why we do that? Wait, this is why we do that? Holy shit, my job would have been so much easier when I was back at that position if I actually understood why we were doing all of this. Like, it was literally mind-blowing to like, have those different vantage points over the course of a year and see how, if back then I had understood so many of these things, I would have made very different decisions. I would have handled things in a very different way. And so that's always been something I've really carried with me to think about, like, yeah, even the team member that's like just posting your content or whatever, I guarantee you, if they see the big picture, if they see like what your values are, what matters to you, why you do things, that kind of stuff, they're going to handle that with different energy than if it's just like, I'm just here to post. Because like the same was true for me in those positions, is like, I fully grasped the scope at a certain point and was like, even disappointed with myself in some of the things I had done, where I was like, oh, that was so important, and I made it really unimportant because I didn't get it, And so that's why it's so helpful for that to roll down. It's not like they have to understand every single decision you've ever made, but if they can understand like how you think about things and why, and what you're probably going to value in a specific circumstance or whatever, I guarantee you'll get completely different outcome in terms of like how supported you feel, how they handle things, etc. Okay, cool. So the last thing I would say, well, it's kind of twofold, but on that note, I think it's also like, and then support the decisions they make. So I feel like that's a piece here too. Like, if you're trying to teach someone to think how you think, like really giving feedback around that, but supporting those decisions, I think go hand in hand. So, like if Megan makes a decision on my behalf, I really try to be like, thank you so much for making that. That's exactly what I would have done. Or like, thank you, that's exactly how I wanted it. Or like, amazing, that's exactly how I was thinking about it. Like, reinforce that so they can see when that is happening. Again, the context is everything. Even once you're much further along, if you're not giving that context, they're like, I hope I got that one right. I didn't hear anything differently. So, okay. And then of course, give feedback if it's not quite how you would have done it, but still with like, hey, you made that decision, we're going to roll with it. Totally cool. In the future, here's the nuance there that I probably would have thought through, or like, here's another way I'm thinking about it, versus like, if you kind of give them like carte blanche to make some decisions, and then you're like, no, we should not have done it like that. Please redo that whole process. They're just going to stop. They're going to be like, fuck it, never mind. Right. Versus if you're like, cool, you did that up to this point in exactly the way I would. We're going to roll with that. Feels super fine, but here's this. I don't know. I feel like you could probably share a lot from that perspective, Megan, but I do think that the actual like feedback loop there, and the like, you have my support no matter what you decide thing.
Yeah, I think that it's like giving, again, kind of the same thing that we've been talking about throughout this whole conversation, is like providing context around it, right? Like, thank you so much because I, asked you to make that decision, or I appreciate that you made that decision, or whatever. And then like providing context and reason, like not just saying like, that's not how I would have done it. I wish you would have done it this way, or something like that.
The fucking worst. Yes.
But if you actually provide more context of like, hey, this is how I would have thought about this, and like moving forward, like we'll just roll with this one for now. And moving forward, this is how I would handle it. Or like, let's just like change the process moving forward or something like that, where I think that it's the more that you can like create a little bit of like openness where like it's okay. I mean, like you have told me several times, like it's okay to make a mistake in this business.
Mhm.
And you're not going to like be punished for it or like, you know what
Yes,
I mean?
totally.
And so I feel like I have a little bit of a breathing room where I almost feel like that helps me make better decisions because I have
Yeah.
that freedom to make those decisions. And I know that like, if I do make a mistake, I can like take steps to correct that and to
Yep.
course correct and learn for doing better in the future, and that's fine, right? Like, and it's not something that like I always feel like anytime that I've made a mistake, it's feedback and growth from it, not
Yeah.
something where it's like you made this mistake, like we need to like drill down into figuring this out, or you know what I mean, where I think that approach is just very different.
It's so funny that you say that too, because I feel like that is just one of the trade-offs. And I think that's almost worth talking about is like, if you want someone to make a lot of decisions in your business and really support you in that way, assume they're going to make some wrong ones, just like you fucking would if it was up to you. Like if I always try to remember that, like if, team sends out like an email with the wrong subject line or whatever, I'm like, is there any chance that I wouldn't have made that mistake at some point if I was doing it? No, none, right? And same here. Is there any chance that I would have never made a wrong decision or a mistake in my business? No. Does it feel more charged when you have to deal with someone else having done that? Sure, of course, right? But like, don't get it twisted into thinking that like, cool, now I'll delegate this. They'll get it right 100% of the time. Nobody will, right? And I even tell Megan, like, you're not only allowed to make mistakes in our business, you're allowed to make expensive mistakes in our business. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, there's nothing we can't fix, but like, I will make expensive mistakes in the business. So if I'm giving her decision making authority, she also has to have the authority to make those too. And not seeing that as wrong is really important. And like Megan said, then helps her actually not feel so charged about every like thing that she's going to do. But this is also why it's like easy for me to like when I just took time off for my wedding or whatever, like, because I know she is going to think about it how I think about it. And I know that any mistake that could possibly happen, of course, none did, but like that could, like, it would be fine. And it's not like it would be any better than I would have done. And that was such a story I told myself at the beginning of business is like, nobody would do it as well as I did. And the truth is like, that's just bullshit. Like I made mistakes all the time at the beginning. It just felt easier because it was me, but yeah. So I think like, if you're going to go this route, if you want someone to make those decisions, trust me, it feels fucking great, but there are trade-offs on the other side of that. You just have to decide what feels good.
I think also like when you, sorry, um,
Oops.
just throwing things around over here. When you make it okay to make mistakes, I think it also makes it so that like your team's willing to say like, hey, I think I did this wrong, or like, whoops, I like they take initiative to be like, I'm pointing out my mistakes.
Yes.
Let's fix this. Let's figure out, or like, can we update this, process so that I remember that for the future or something like that, where I feel like when you, yeah, like are open to that and make it okay, then they're going to be the ones that kind of like come to you more often,
That's so
or
true.
they'll be more likely if you say like this mistake happened or that wasn't the decision I would have made or whatever, they're more likely to then really like learn from the situation and to really like take steps to be proactive about fixing it moving forward.
That's such a good point and so true. Right, because you're not like, oh my God, let me try to clean this mess up so you don't
Right.
see it or
Like,
whatever.
let
You're
me
like,
just like hide this.
yeah,
Like, hope they won't see it.
totally. Okay, so before I forget, I want to ask you guys something, and then we'll give you just a few examples to kind of wrap it up so you can kind of see. I feel like sometimes we talk in generalities so it can apply to everybody, but we'll just give you some examples of what we mean by this. But if you want to come to the Million Her Forum, I have a question for you. And if you answer my question, you will be entered to win a free spot to come. But what I really want to know is if you were going to sign up or if you already did, which forum are you looking forward to most? So mindset, strategy, or execution. So if you just comment below the video in the next, 24 hours? Yeah, by like 6 o'clock tomorrow. If you comment below and tell me which one of those three you are most looking forward to or most want to come to, total chance to win a spot. So I would love to hear what you guys have to say about that. I would love to hear what you're looking forward to the most. If you don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, I am hosting 3 forums. First one is going to be on mindset, and it's February 20th. And it's basically almost exactly what we're talking about, in a sense that like, I want you to come to that because I want you to learn how I'm thinking about mindset. So I'm going to teach you some concepts around how I think about it with clients, probably do that for like 20 to 30 minutes. Then I'm going to like literally answer questions and coach you privately or personally. I guess it's not privately, on the forum. So you are going to get a questionnaire to fill out when you sign up, where I'm going to ask you a lot of different things. So I kind of intimately know you and your business. And then if we coach live, obviously that's great. If you just want to put a question on the forum, you can check that you don't want to be coached live, and that's totally fine too, but I can still answer your question. But it's really for this reason, because I want you to come and learn how I'm thinking about things, which is not just going to help in terms of, you know, how you're applying it to your business, but it's also going to help in terms of everything that we talked about, how you apply it to team, how you apply it to your clients. Like if you can get really clear on like, this makes sense versus like, I'm just doing this journaling because someone told me to, right? Versus like, oh, I fully get why I'm doing this journaling because blank, or because I'm thinking about it through this lens. That's when everything changes, in my opinion. I think that's why so many of my clients have such quick success. And not as because they're not coming and me just being like, go do this week, go do this week, go do this, but more like, here's how we're thinking about this, here's how we're thinking about that. And then obviously it not only helps them, it helps their people too. So if you want to be entered to win a free spot, tell me mindset, strategy, or execution, which one are you most interested in, and 24 hours. Okay, I wanted to say that before I forgot because Megan already had to remind me to do that. So, you know. Okay, so examples. So I think like there's like 3 main examples I can think of like how you kind of like make decisions in the business. I think one of the big ones is like, if I'm out or like on calls or whatever, you're really good at making client decisions. So like if a client is like, hey, can I move this session? Or hey, can we do something like this? Or hey, can I like, you know, I don't even know what an example is. Hey, can I get access to this or switch up this? Like, you know, reliably how I'm going to think about that, right?
Totally. And I think that like what's really important there too is that like clearly like every actual question that a client has is different. Like every client like has a different circumstance. Like someone says like, hey, I accidentally like I canceled this call. Can I like reschedule it or something like, and it's not something where, you know, every situation is the same. So we just have a blanket policy that we always do this thing, right? It's always a like, I know how Lacey thinks about things. Therefore, I know how to handle and apply that like idea and that process and that framework to the specific question or specific circumstance.
Yeah. So like, this is just a circumstance I can think of recently, but like one of my clients had something change with her schedule and her time zone. And so she had emailed in asking like if she could get calls at a specific time. Megan doesn't have to ask me that. Like she knows that I'm always going to be client focused. I always want our clients to be the priority. I'm always going to be as flexible as I possibly can. And so she was just like, cool, yes, let me change it up. And then she had to ask me like if one date worked or whatever, but like the decision was already made. And I just had to say if that time, you know, worked for me that day or whatever. But it's so nice because she knows I'm going to say, of course, you're a longtime client and I love, you know, being accommodating in that way. So again, other clients of hers might feel totally different. Like they might have a really strict schedule and not be able to do that. But the value is that Megan knows how we're thinking about it. It's not like Lacey's right. It's like, that's just how Lacey is in her business, right?
And I think like that's a really good example too of like, if I had come to you and said like, hey, this client wants to do X, Y, and Z, is that okay? And then you say, yes, that's fine, blah, blah, blah. And then I would say, hey, follow-up question. What about this day? So I feel like that's where like so many of the back and forth starts to kind of add up.
Yep,
And so
yep.
if you can even just like kind of like, I can make the decision of like, yes, that's possible. Now, like I'm drilling down into like, what information do I actually need from Lacey versus what information do I already have and know?
So good. I love that. Okay. So next example would be, you always give design direction without really needing me, because you know how I think about that in terms of like what I like and how I think about like what I care is in terms of like graphics and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you pretty much gave like all design direction related to the website, and like on our day-to-day, you're giving all of that. Like you never ask me that shit anymore.
No, I feel like it's like very rare, and more or less it's more like, hey, just like final approval, like kind of thing. Like I think for the website, I feel like I don't know, like I know that there was like an initial design review, and then I think that there were a couple times I sent specific things over to you where I could go either way. Like I feel like either option is great. So just like, giving you final approval on things. But I feel like there was so much where, behind the scenes with our developer, it was like I could make a lot of those decisions on the fly, where I met with him more frequently and Lacey wasn't actually involved in the entire, like needing to be in weekly meetings or anything like that, because I could kind of like take care of majority of that and only bring you in at like key points during the process.
And we literally had this conversation where we had talked about, is now the right time to do the website? And I think I specifically was like, now is not the right time to do the website if I need to be in weekly design meetings, because that's not happening right now. Now is the right time to do the website if you feel good on all that. And you were like, I got it, no worries. So that's so helpful. And now it doesn't mean that I don't ever get to say, like, there was one thing where I was like, oh, I know I said yes to this, but I actually just rethought it and I want to change this. And so like we did. So it doesn't mean you don't get to be in your own business or whatever. It's just like, you don't have that same level of commitment around every project you're moving forward, right?
And I think it just like limits some of the micro decisions where like there were certain things where I was like, oh no, Lacey's going to hate that color. Or like, something like that, where it's like, oh, that's like really, I don't know, like dark or something, whatever it was. But it was like, I could just tell like, she's not going to like that. Can we go in a different direction, so that by the time like you're reviewing it, it's at least like 80 to 90% there, where then you're not needing to give so much of the entire like feedback from ground zero. Like it's already kind of like moved down the line a little bit more.
Yes, I love that. It's so true. Okay, last example we'll give, because obviously we can't do a short live stream.
I seriously don't know how.
Is that Megan makes pretty much all of the content decisions as it relates to what written content is going out when. And there's a couple reasons that she can do this. Again, one, because she knows how we think about things, but two, because she knows what we have coming up, because we over communicate on those things too. So, and because we have communicated on the fact that she has a green light to make all those decisions. So in terms of like the content topic for this week, Megan picked that. Right? Not of my lives, but of like the written content that we have going out. She picked that from stuff we already have and decided that this week this made sense in context of what we have coming up. So that's really helpful for me too, because I can focus on creating it and that kind of stuff, like the creative part. And she focuses on like, cool, what makes sense in terms of what we have coming up? How are we thinking about what we have coming up? And then makes that. So it's like a really like cohesive thing, but I don't have to decide on every single step.
And I think like what's important there too is like, you always, again, like have veto power where you're like, hey, I'm really not feeling this content this week. Can we swap it for something else?
Yep.
Right. So it's like, like, I think it's important that when you do pass decisions to your team, always remembering that like you can always change your mind. Like just because, you kind of have given them the green light on something, like it's not necessarily that you're like just stuck with their decision no matter what it was. You can always say like, hey, cool, like I'm just not feeling this. Let's go in this direction instead. Or I just felt really inspired around this. Let's do this instead, or whatever, right?
Yes. And again, with that context, thanks for picking it. I feel really inspired around this. Can we do this instead? Right? Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think this is one of those things that seems so simple. Like the gist is basically like over communicate and give a shitload of context, right? But is very much a practice to lean into, and is very much one of those things that falls to the wayside when you're busy or moving through things fast. So I hope that this is just sort of that reminder that like, this is one of those things that's not urgent, but it's important. Meaning like, if you want someone on your team long-term that is going to be able to take so much off your plate and make so many decisions and move so many projects forward, that's basically a requirement. If you just need to like save yourself 5 minutes today, well, fine. But like, I promise that will bite you in the butt later. So really focus on this and really try to pay attention to like that extra 3 minutes or whatever, biggest difference maker.
Totally. And I think it's something too where you can always say like, give a short answer and say like, hey, I'll provide context later. Like I'll circle back to this if I haven't pinged me at the end of the day or something like that, so that you can just like do a short answer, but going back and giving that extra feedback and extra context, I think is really important, even if it's not like in the exact moment.
Totally. I love that. Shari says, what I love about this conversation is that I get Lacey and Megan's perspective as a dual lens of how I'd apply this as a CEO in my business versus as a service provider supporting my clients. Appreciate you all sharing. So good. That's exactly what we wanted to do, because I feel like hearing from the service provider's perspective is really, really, really helpful, because I feel like sometimes like I've like said this to my clients before where I'm like, cool, they need to think how you think. And they're like, oh my God, that's so bitchy. I couldn't like go to them and say, I want you to think how I think. And I'm like, trust me, they will be happy about it. And so I think it's like helpful to hear it from both sides for sure.
Totally.
So good. Well, thank you, Megan. I love you. Can you tell them where they can find all the things from you and what they can find as well as it relates to all of this? Okay.
So y'all can find me at whitespace.team, and
she has the most beautiful website.
I do have the most beautiful website. It is my favorite.
So good.
And so I have a couple templates and trainings. I have one in the works that I'm very excited about. But I have one on my content system. I have one on my team hiring process, which is great. And then I have one in the works. So you can also request too. Like I have a wait list, so you can put your name on a wait list and then like email me and say like, hey, I really need a process around XYZ. Like, what do you recommend for this? And so I'm always creating new templates and trainings. So I am always happy to provide something specific if you're needing something specific in your business, whether it's a system or something to help you manage your team better. I'm available.
Yay. Okay. So even if you don't need any of those things, just go to Megan's website. And if you do need any of those things, definitely buy them from her, because she's the best. So I love you. Thank you for being here. And if reminder, comment below, are you most interested in mindset, strategy, or execution? By tomorrow, we'll pick a winner. So we love you all. Have a good week. Bye.